Hey, I'm Charlie, and I wanted to say a few words before you begin this video. If you are or were ever one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or have family, friends, or coworkers who are Jehovah's Witnesses, some of the information in this video is going to hurt. It's going to hurt the way setting a broken bone hurts, and there is healing to be found on the other side of it, but it may not be the right time for you to deal with that. Your well-being is more important than our channel views. So the Watchtower's leaders can also be seen as a gang of thugs, a religious mafia. It's all pinky rings and shiny suits, male dominance, secret dealings in shell companies, criminal defense lawyers, disregard for both the law and law enforcement, hatred of the media, shady real estate investments, and the use of threats, intimidation, and blackmail to extort free services, time, and money. And that makes sense, because gangs are also abusive families, businesses, and totalitarian governments. They're typically formed by marginalized groups in hostile environments, and they grow by recruiting people in crisis in search of safety, identity, and belonging.
Thus, they begin to change from the inside out. They grow mighty on the person they are inside, and thus they become more spiritual people. They become more trusted by the organization.
Criminal organizations tend to take a few different forms. Besides street gangs, there are patron-client networks and bureaucratic corporate operations. Patron-client networks are usually composed of hierarchies based on naturally forming family, social and cultural traditions, tight-knit focus on activity or labor, fraternal or nepotistic value systems, personalized activity including family and cultural rivalries, territorial disputes, recruitment and training of family members, entrenched belief systems, reliance on tradition including religion, family values, cultural expectations, class politics, gender roles, etc., and communication and rule enforcement mechanisms dependent on organizational structure, social etiquette, history of criminal involvement, and collective decision-making. Bureaucratic/corporate organized crime groups are defined by the general rigidity of their internal structures. They focus more on how the operation works, succeeds, sustains itself, or avoids retribution, and are generally typified by a complex authority structure, an extensive division of labor between classes within the organization, meritocratic, responsibilities carried out in an impersonal manner, extensive written rules and regulations, and top-down communication and rule enforcement mechanisms. Does any of that sound familiar? In these organizations, loyalty is all, dissent is forbidden, and impeding or revealing the family's criminal activities will result in severe punishment. The Mafia calls that omerta. The Watchtower Corporation calls it not bringing reproach on Jehovah's name. Omerta demands silence in the face of questioning, non-cooperation with authorities, the government, or outsiders, especially during criminal investigations, and willfully ignoring and generally avoiding interference with the illegal activities of the group. For instance, not contacting law enforcement or the authorities when one is aware of, witness to, or even the victim of certain crimes. Same for the Watchtower Corporation in every way. As for the countless child abuse crimes that have been covered up by the Watchtower Corporation, those are only crimes in the countries where their devoted subjects reside. They aren't crimes in the Watchtower's kingdom, which is why they see no need to report them to any superior authorities. The Watchtower Corporation's governing body, its lawyers and lackeys, do not recognize any authority as superior to their own.
So in this talk, we're not going to discuss persecution. We're going to discuss two of the subtle means Satan uses to weaken our faith: apostasy and negative reports about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media. You know, we receive letters at times from brothers and sisters who are troubled by something they saw on a web page, an accusation, a rumor about the society or about the organization. And some who aren't really apostates can cause just as much trouble as the apostates do by their negative talk and criticism.
Consider what happened to Erica Garza. By the time she was 16, Erica's family had moved away from Othello to a new home and new Kingdom Hall in California, where one day she found the courage to tell her family her terrible secret. And what did her father, Reuben Garza, do?
Report it to the police?
No, never mentioned report it to the police. Take care of it in the congregation.
Reuben Garza, who was one of the church's lay ministers or elders, says that's precisely what Jehovah's Witness leaders had taught him. And so instead of going to the police, he and his wife Alejandra called the elders back in Othello.
But let me say the obvious. I mean, your daughter had been raped. Didn't you think, I gotta go to the cops?
That was my first reaction. But as a witness, first you gotta go to the elders when you have a problem.
But the elders didn't go to the police either.
So obviously, Jehovah hates murmuring. You could say he abominates it. But now the question is, why? Well, let's briefly discuss 3 reasons. 1, it breeds discontent, both in ourselves and in others. And since murmurers never keep their complaints to themselves, it sows discontent in others. See?
John White, the congregation's top elder, explained at a court hearing.
We're satisfied that he was repentant and could be admitted to the congregation again. To us, we don't see a problem.
The Watchtower some years ago had a little article, Why Keep Free from Murmuring? And it gave an example. It says, suppose a Christian starts to complain to you about a certain appointed elder, about how he performs his duties, how he handles his parts on the platform. And it says, if you listen to the complainer, you can begin to think as he does. Then, as you observe the elder, you could be saying to yourself, now that I think about it, what my friend says about this elder is true. I never thought of it that way before. See, before it didn't bother you, now it bothers you. Eventually, everything the elder does can be improper in your eyes.
Do you think the brothers who write Watchtower articles are living in the real world?
When it comes to the matter of reporting, then that's something the parents can decide. We certainly never tell them not to report a case of child molestation.
So I called my elders and I said, look, I'm taking it to the police.
What did they say?
Don't. Or else.
Or else what?
That's what I said. I said, or else what? And he said, just don't. I said, what? I'll be disfellowshipped? If I take it to the police, is that what's going to happen to me? And he said, yes, you will be disfellowshipped. And I was just like, what? You're going to disfellowship me for being raped, yet the guy who raped me is still a Jehovah's Witness? And they said, don't. Don't take it to the police. You will be condemned by God.
So a murmurer is actually imitating the methods of the devil. And apparently a murmurer reminds Jehovah of his archenemy Satan. And that's certainly something no wise person wants to do, remind Jehovah of Satan.
In a letter to Dateline, the church's general council adds that it is possible that a few of the 77,799 elders of Jehovah's Witnesses have not followed the direction that they have been given regarding investigating and reporting child abuse.
You know, the church now says they don't have a special problem. It's a societal problem, and they do everything they can to stop pedophiles from hurting children within the Jehovah's Witness Church. What do you say to them?
Liars.
Now, let's consider the second challenge we face. Negative reports about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media. Some people believe everything they read in the newspaper or see on TV. Do you? Should you? Consider this. Now, you're working from door to door, and you meet a householder who says, you Jehovah's Witnesses are terrible people. You let your children die. You don't accept medical treatment. Well, you ask the householder, do you know any of Jehovah's Witnesses personally? No. Then where did you get the idea that we let our children die and don't accept medical treatment?
He says, I told one doctor who tried to get me to take blood, you may think I'm crazy, but I have all my thinking abilities. I just want to live by Jehovah's law on blood. He knows what is best for us. The best thing for me is to respect the sanctity of life, and if I die, I will live again. Good example of faith in the face of incredible stress and persecution. Amazing young fella. And when he's resurrected, you'll hear more from him because Jehovah loves that little fella.
Now, it's bad enough if people in the world believe everything they read in the newspaper. But brothers, let's not be among them. Let's not be naive. Let's consider things carefully. Similarly, sometimes there's a TV program about Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, a few of these programs are balanced and fair. Many, or I dare say most, are not.
Two years ago, elders from this church heard a shocking story. This young woman told them her father was sexually abusing her. The elders called her a liar.
I said to them, well, what are you meant to do then if he's doing something wrong? And they said, come to us and you'll deal with it. And I said to them, well, I've already spoken to you and you've told me I'm a liar.
The elder sent her home to her father. They didn't tell her that 3 years earlier he'd confessed to them that he was abusing her sister. When confronted, Ian Cousins confessed he was abusing his daughter. He said he was sorry, so the elder sent him home with her. The abuse continued. Cousins was reproved or admonished publicly by the elders, but church policy meant that no one was told why, not even his younger daughter.
Nobody told me anything. They all basically kept it all under wraps and told nobody what had happened.
What they did was keep a record of her father's name and confession on a church database, a register of suspected and convicted paedophiles to be monitored.
Every detail is written down about what happened, where it happened, when it happened, how it happened.
So you're saying the organisation has its own sexual offenders register, if you like?
That's exactly right.
That it's keeping to itself and not showing others?
Exactly right. These men remain anonymous to anyone outside the organization and anyone really inside the organization unless you are personally reporting the matter.
We asked Alison Cousins to obtain a copy of her records using the Data Protection Act. There, in black and white, was proof that the Jehovah's Witnesses had known for 3 years that her father was a self-confessed paedophile. Yet far from monitoring him, the elders twice turned a blind eye to his abuse of his daughters.
As a result, some government officials are taken in. They believe the slanderous accusations of the apostates. Now, if they just take the time to check the facts, they'd see that they're being lied to, but they don't check the facts.
When he confessed to church elders, Cousins got a mild rebuke. When he confessed in court, he got 5 years in jail.
I believe you were the last to know. They had told several people before coming to the police, and these people had not reported it either to the police or the social services. We have a duty to protect, and if we're not told, we're unable to protect.
Bill Bowen, a lifelong member, has resigned as an elder. He says the men at the top are protecting the church, not the children.
They do not want people to know that they have this problem. And by covering it up, they just hurt one person. By letting it out, then they hurt the image of the church.
Elders must report abuse to the church's legal desk. Only if the law demands it must they contact the police. If it doesn't, they may be told they have a moral duty to call them, but often it seems to stop here. It seems to go no further than the church's own secret database. So how many names are on the secret database? We asked the headquarters in New York. They refused to tell us. Focusing on numbers isn't meaningful, they said. How many names do you suspect are on that list?
23,720.
How do you know that?
I was contacted by sources within the church. I was given a figure of over 20,000. 2 different sources came back to me and said that number is actually more specific and gave me a figure of 23,720. They told me that they had accessed the internal database, and that figure was based on child molesters in the USA, Canada, and Europe. And that's the figure that they were given.
Over 20,000 names on a secret database. His campaign, Silent Lambs, has already heard from 5,000 victims.
You see, David had complete confidence in Jehovah. You see, instead of taking matters into his own hands, he had the total confidence that Jehovah was going to handle this situation in his own way and in his own time. David modestly trusted in Jehovah.
Now again, it's bad enough, brothers, when government officials are taken in by false reports. Don't you be taken in. Have you ever heard the expression trial by media? It works like this. Someone's charged with a crime, and the case is widely publicized in the media, and the media present the case in such a way that everyone who hears about it thinks the man is guilty.
Heather Berry and her stepsister, Holly Brewer, have flown here from New Hampshire. The man who abused them has been jailed for a minimum of 56 years. He was Heather's father. Holly Brewer and Heather Berry's mother knows her loyalty to the church cost her daughters dearly. Paul Berry, her husband, beat them. She suspected worse, that Heather was being sexually abused, and went to the elders.
I could tell from their looks on their faces that I'd done a bad thing. That I had spoken against my husband, which is a bad thing. And so their solution was that I should be a better wife and I should pray more. That was their solution. That's how I could stop him from battering us. I assumed they were right. They had to be right. Because they know everything, because they're God's representatives on earth.
For who can lift his hand against the anointed of Jehovah and remain innocent?
Time and again, the girls were told to wait outside while their mother begged local elders for help. Time and again, they saw her sent home to pray harder and be a better wife.
The one who keeps harping on a matter separates close friends. So notice, love should move us to cover over, forgive the transgressions of others. But if we don't do that, we keep harping about their transgressions, murmuring about them, see.
Her mother saw the elders more than a dozen times, but remarkably, it never struck Sarah Poisson to look for help outside the church.
You can say that your children's lives are in danger, and in the same breath that you couldn't possibly go to the police. How can that be?
Because God would not want that. It would never have occurred to me. And even if it had, I would not have done it. Because he's a man. He's a baptized male, and he's a ministerial servant, and I was a woman, and they're kids. And that's even worse than being a woman.
It is unthinkable from Jehovah's standpoint for me to lift my hand against the anointed of Jehovah.
These things need to stay in this room. I heard that many, many times. You need to pray about it more. I can show you my Bible. It's paper thin. I still have it. It's all worn out. Did a lot of praying.
After you were told them that her father was sexually abusing Heather, nothing changed?
No. Well, yeah, things changed. They got a lot worse for me.
Making allowances for others, forgiving them, not harping about their transgressions, but forgiving as we pray and hope Jehovah will do for us.
At that point, I had to make a decision between God and my kids. And I knew, well, at that time I knew, that if I chose my kids, I didn't have a prayer. But I didn't care anymore. So we lost everything in one day.
Of course, to avoid a lawsuit for slander or libel, these media reports are very carefully worded.
According to the church's own internal records, church officials knew of 17 girls who had accused Fitzwater of molesting them. But police say the church never passed that information on to them.
So suppose a report indicates that someone has been charged with a crime or that he's being investigated. All right, you have two words, charged and investigated. It doesn't mean he's guilty.
Both Paul Berry in New Hampshire and Daniel Fitzwater in Nevada ultimately were convicted of sexual crimes and are now in prison.
Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God. So, brothers, we really have to think about these things.
Simon Brady's parents were going through a divorce. Jaswant Patty offered to help out, take him off his mother's hands.
What did he do?
It's quite severe, to be honest with you. Like, very severe. Like, even though to think of it, I don't. It hurts now to talk about it, to be honest with you. And I've done that once already. Like, I find it very hard to talk about anymore, basically.
But what happened next caused them serious concern. An elder confronted the victim's father, calling the man's son a liar. The father complained to the police, who warned the elder to stay away from the victims' families. His excuse was that as an elder, he had every right to investigate the case for himself.
It was his duty to test the evidence prior to the court case. I advised him that if that sort of behaviour continued, then if an allegation had been formally made, then I would have to investigate that particular person for offences of pervert the course of justice and in fact witness intimidation. The conversation did get a little bit heated towards the end, but obviously I had a duty to protect my complainants and witnesses to the case. I made sure and sent out the signal that I was prepared to protect them and take drastic steps, i.e. arresting people, if they breach that.
We may read that a person or an organization was sued and then settled out of court. Does settling out of court mean that they were guilty? Not necessarily. Now, in this country and others, court cases are often handled by a jury. Now, who are on the jury? Ordinary citizens with no legal training. But not only that, these ordinary citizens don't always have access to all the facts because the judge and lawyers decide which facts will be shared with the jury. So it's unlikely that the whole truth will ever come out in court. Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court.
The London headquarters, the Bethel, refused to discuss any specific case. They said this was because the elders had to respect the confidentiality of the victims. But the victims wanted answers. We again asked for an interview with their spokesman, Paul Gillies. When he refused, we phoned him, told him we were recording, and asked a simple question. Are elders told to report allegations of abuse to the police or not?
The elders' guideline is if you get any single allegation of child abuse come to your attention, phone this office.
Why phone this office? Why not phone your local police station?
Well, you see, the first thing is we have to make sure for the protection of the child. That's
Is it
our
the protection of
first
the
priority.
child, or is it fair to ask you, isn't it the protection of the church that comes straight to mind there?
It is the protection of the child. We have a child protection policy.
But someone will say, no, I don't believe in settling out of court. I believe in justice and truth. So that brings up the question, is it wrong to settle a matter before it goes to trial? So when Jesus talks about prison and a judge, he's obviously referring to what a Gentile judge would do. Now, you couldn't necessarily expect justice from him. Why might he rule against our brother? Well, maybe he got paid under the table by the other party. Or maybe he was prejudiced against the race or the religion of the other party.
He had already been found guilty, and they found room in their hearts to stand in front of that child and say, we don't believe any of it. And what they were saying was they didn't believe the child, they didn't believe in the system of justice, they didn't believe the judge, they didn't believe the jury, they didn't believe anyone except themselves.
And we'll be successful in applying Philippians 2:14, which says, keep doing all things free from murmurings. And it didn't say most things. Keep doing all things free from murmurings, and we'll prove to Jehovah that we're assets in his organization.
Some of these people gave good statements and very, very positive in their attitude and support of Alison and her sister. Other people felt that they didn't want to be involved and gave a negative statement, and some people refused to speak to us altogether.
Why?
I have no idea why. They just refused to speak to the police.
Were they Jehovah's Witnesses?
I believe they were.
But they wouldn't help?
They wouldn't give a statement to us, no.
We're taught if you go to elders, if you want to be believed or you have a complaint about someone, then there has to be more than one of you. There has to be two people. There has to be more than one witness, basically. You know, what can I say? They want more than one witness. You know. How could I have gone to them, They want to believe me.
They actually said to me, unless I could provide 2 Jehovah's Witnesses who had actually seen the offence, then as far as they were concerned, the offence hadn't taken place. I then made it my duty to actually speak to the legal services team of the Bethel in London and voice my disquiet about the lack of cooperation I'd had from start to finish from this inquiry.
I told him everything that had happened and what my dad had done to me, and he said that he didn't believe me at all, and he said that I was a liar and that my dad would never do such a thing, and that my dad was such a nice man.
It's not so much did they believe me, did they want to believe me, They didn't want to believe me. I think they turned up at my house, They weren't open-minded, and I think they'd already made their mind up even before they got to my house,
The police did believe him, and they tracked down a second boy who'd been abused by Patty.
And it was so powerful to be believed.
So, brothers, let's not be naive. Don't believe everything you read. Just because an article is called a news report doesn't make it true.
Even after he was convicted by a jury on all 17 indictments, 24 members of the Kingdom Hall turned up at the sentencing hearing. They all appeared to give character statements for Paul Berry. In Birmingham, as in New Hampshire, the elders supported the accused. Even after Patty was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in jail, they didn't waver. At the next meeting in the Kingdom Hall, the elders made sure the congregation knew where they stood.
There was an announcement given saying that as a body of elders, that's including every elder in Rubery, we feel as a body of elders, basically this man is innocent, we believe he's innocent, and the Bethel have informed us they will do everything in their power to help this man.
Erica Garza's accused molester, Manuel Belize, showed up in court with plenty of support.
His side was full of Jehovah's Witnesses. People I thought were my friends, but they were there to support him. And on my side was my family.
I can't imagine how badly she must have felt not to have been believed by elders in her own close-knit community. What a horrible blow to a child this must have been. Shame. Shame on them.
So be careful. If the conversation turns negative, get out.
The database, Mr. Briggs. Why should the Jehovah's Witnesses keep a database of men who have confessed to being paedophiles, but the police aren't told? Do you think that's reasonable behaviour, Mr. Briggs?
We'd been told we'd find a member of the governing body here. Ted Jarretts is one of the men responsible for the church's child protection policy. For more than 2 months, we've been asking them for an interview. We want answers to some simple questions. Why do they keep their database of suspected paedophiles secret? Why don't they report all allegations of abuse to the police? Why do they send children back to the arms of their abusers? They refused to talk to us, but here at last, we had our chance.
Tell me about the database. How do you justify keeping a list of people, men in some cases, who have confessed to paedophilia, but you have not reported them to the authority? What justification is there for you to keep that list?
You have a privacy law. You have a directive from the European Union. You observe that, don't you?
So when allegations of abuse are made, it's all right to keep them private?
I think you were answered. That question was answered should be to your satisfaction.
Can you answer it now?
I'm not going to repeat. I'll just tell you exactly that you can go and you see it in writing. It's all in print. You know, the Bible says, do not go beyond the things that are written. We don't go beyond the things that are written.
We simply cannot go beyond what is written.
Keep in mind that the anointed are not the head of our organization. Jesus is.
Satan is behind the twisted teachings of apostates. He's the father of the lie. And those who lie are doing exactly what their father does.
Another way we can contribute to the oneness, rejecting false stories that are designed to separate us from Jehovah's organization. As an example, Think about the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive toward pedophiles. I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it? If anybody takes action against someone who would threaten our young ones and takes action to protect our young ones, it's Jehovah's organization. We reject outright such lies.
Pure worship has been restored. We're bathing in it. And the worship of Jehovah will never be corrupted, ever again, for all eternity.
The apostates have nothing to offer us, brothers. All they have to offer is hate. All they have is, to offer is criticism and negative talk.
Well, now, brothers, why is this an important discussion really for all of us? Well, all of us face trying situations in life. And when we face those situations, we may be tempted to want to rush in and handle them. We may be tempted to ignore Bible principles and even published direction that we have from the faithful and discreet slave. How wise we are in those moments, in those situations, to step back for a moment, take a deep breath, count to 10, and say to ourselves, do I really have the authority to do what I'm about to do? Is it really my place to say what I'm about to say? Instead, would it be better to wait on Jehovah to correct this situation?
They're living in denial. Denial of what's happening to their children. And it's not a matter, you see, if they accept that, then they accept that there is a problem. So rather than admit that there's a problem, they will just let children go on and continue to be molested and not do anything about it.
By sticking closely to the direction that we have from Jehovah and from the faithful and discreet slave, and by maintaining our full and complete confidence that Jehovah will correct any matters that need to be rectified, we can have the privilege to walk, not just for a short time, but to walk eternally in modesty with our magnificent, our wonderful God.
Sexual abuse of children is not to be tolerated. And I don't care what their reasoning was. It was faulted reasoning. They were wrong, and as far as I'm concerned, they were criminally negligent. That's my take on it.
Even with just the child's word, with one witness, with just the mother's word, without the two witnesses their Bible tells them they need.
Well, unfortunately, most kids don't have several witnesses observing them get raped. It's an unfortunate part of it.
Loving kindness has been replaced by loyal love. Now, that's a toughie for some Bethelites. I hear loving kindness quite a bit still. We'll get over it.
And just as with totalitarian regimes, religions, and political movements, there's plenty of historical evidence about how criminal organizations crumble. Why not use it?